Okay, welcome back to another Jspeak podcast. You know, if you need something done, have a busy person do it. And we're certainly glad we have Piers Ridyard working on Radix and on this technology, moving sort of, from Web 2 to Web 3, but like a mature Web 3. Piers, I wanted to start this off. I sent you a question a few days ago, and maybe you thought about it since, but I told you I would start off with this question. Piers, if like I'm pretty secretly bullish on Radix, I don't try to be too hypey about it because I think it's actually got the most potential out of like things I've seen. But if this story really is a success story long term, and you have a significant more amount of influence than you do right now, what would you do with that influence?
So if I had more influence than I have right now, what would I do with that influence? Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think that
A significant amount more.
a significant amount. Yeah. I think that the best thing to do is to increase the number of people who understand what Web3, what's possible in Web3, and that they should be using it. And when I say that, like I always think of, most people think of getting into Web3. Like if you talk to someone on the street, they'll know what Bitcoin is. They'll probably know what ETH is. But they certainly aren't going to know what a smart contract is. They're not going to know what a Web3 platform is. And and if you think about the early days of the internet, when AOL online was the main way in which people were using the internet, they weren't actually using the internet. They were just using this walled garden that was like the pretend internet. You had your mail there, you had your news there, but you couldn't surf the web. And it was the creation of a combination of the personal computer and the web browser that meant that people could start using the internet in a way that it was sort of meant for, which is this open platform created for creativity, this open platform for business innovation. And what's more is this open platform for opportunity. Like, in the 90s and in 2000s, and even today, there are stories of like entrepreneurs who got their start in their dorm room in college and university, right? And they build $1 million app or a $1 million website in a few weeks from their dorm room, and they launch it, and it takes the world by storm. And I think that if I had a lot more influence than I have today, something like Elon Musk level,
Yeah.
the thing is that to get people to do is to get started using Web3 properly. Like go buy a meme, like go get involved in an ecosystem. Like buy a meme coin, but don't just buy the meme coin on an exchange. Don't go to Coinbase or Binance or something like that. That is essentially the same as AOL online. It's a little, walled garden,
Yeah.
right? And it's not about that. Like go and actually spend time in the communities, download a wallet, download the Radix wallet, download MetaMask, download whatever, and get started. And obviously I'd be saying, look, go use Radix, because we built Radix for mainstream. We built Radix for everyday people, to be able to use this stuff. But the most important thing is we have to grow the pie. We have to get more people realizing that the way to get into crypto isn't to invest in coins. The way to get into crypto is to go and be part of communities and go and use applications and be part of DAOs and like understand that this is a revolution that's happening right now. And it's happening for every level, right? It's happening for the individual with their opportunity suddenly massively expanded with their ability to go like build new shit. And then it's also happening at the level of the business, right? Like this is fundamentally changing what it means to be able to do everything from supply chain management to sort of international payments to sort of repo and loans and all of this stuff. So there's this huge business opportunity, there's this huge individual opportunity, and then there's this just the fact that by more people coming in and having great ideas, you increase the potential of the entire space. And that's what I would want to do most with that influence.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, man. Like I think that's a solid answer. I think it's a tough question because we all change in our lives. Like our thoughts are changing. Like the landscapes of what we even work on probably change. It's funny you mentioned AOL because I'm a Gen Z. So I don't really have a lot of frame of reference with that, Piers. I'm sorry.
Sure. It's all
But
right.
I'm looking.
It was pre my time as well. I know, like
Oh, okay, okay, cool.
it's just like I think that when you're thinking about tech movements, when you're thinking
Yeah,
about political movements,
I did
you have to
understand it
think
though. I want to
you
be
have you,
yeah.
right. You have to think in terms of you have to be a student of history, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Like
yeah.
AOL, Netscape Navigator, like the rise of these applications and what they meant in the early days of the internet, why JavaScript was created in the way it was. Like they all have patterns that we can look at today.
Well, I was thinking about how many walled gardens there are today. And when you were talking, and I was thinking about eBay or Amazon, and couldn't those
Right.
be kind of walled gardens? I mean,
Yeah.
if you had you can it for me, I guess I've been viewing this and I love this. I love when you talk about the topic composability. I love the
Right.
difference when Dan Hughes points out, since it's kind of like this sharded network approach with Radix, but it extends sharding from what we've seen or I've seen, and it has atomic commitment, and that was a cool differentiator. And I look at the tech a lot, but what I really actually look at the tech for is the use cases. And I
Right.
think the walled garden, like making walled gardens, not I don't know if this is correct, but how I would like to say it is making walled gardens obsolete is sort of like starting to happen. I mean, you
Yeah.
can connect things that were not connectable, and I don't know.
I
I,
mean, bear with me on this, right? Like I'll take you on a little journey, but I think you're absolutely right. I think you're sort of like touching the edges of it.
yeah.
Every single thing that exists that has any kind of economic value in our economy, in our world, if you start with the principle that you can tokenize it and you can exchange it, then then you sort of open up this entire universe of possibilities. So you're talking about Amazon or eBay being walled gardens. They are. Like I can't buy something that's for sale on eBay on any other platform but eBay. I
Hmm.
can't buy what's for sale on eBay on Amazon. Why is that? Well, it's because they are two systems that haven't been made to talk to each other. And if you think about the stock that every single company in the world has, not equity stock, but as in like physical stock, right? I have, some coffee over here, and I've got some fresh fruit and vegetables over here, and I've got some speakers over here, and I've got some computers over there. Every single one of those have to go down these sort of like channels, right? Distribution channels, and then retail channels, and then to the end user. If you have a single unified platform in which you can represent every single one of those objects, there's no reason that you can't buy and sell everything everywhere,
Is
or
that
at least have an interface to do that. Like I want to sell my shoes. Like why do I have to pick eBay or or Facebook Marketplace or something like that? I just want to sell my shoes. My shoes are available. And there's like another layer to this, which is then, okay, once you have a platform where you have tokenized the commercial aspect of everything so that you can buy everything, you have a normalization of pricing, which is good, means that you don't get like pricing disparities, means that you're always getting the best price for the things you sell and always get the best price for the things you buy. But the next problem you have is discovery. So now I've got the billions of items that are available on top of these public ledgers. How do I discover? And I think this is actually where AI is going to come in. I think AI is going to be a really big part of this filtering process, because as soon as I can say what my preferences are and what I need, as long as that can then be found, then I can transact immediately. I want this pair of Nike sneakers, right?
yeah.
And the AI can go, okay, I found one that is the closest to you and the cheapest to you, and you can buy it right now, immediately. and that transaction happens in the background. You don't have to go to a venue for exchange. You don't have to log on to a system. That happens in the background, and you've got the best price, the thing you wanted.
Can I make a couple comments? First, yeah, that's the whole thing that I think is so valuable about Radix. It's like, let's just have one ledger, or
Right.
like, let's just have one thing. Because I think there's benefits from having a single place versus multiple, and I've, talked about this quite a bit on my YouTube and stuff. But the other comment you just made was just blew my mind, because I think you're absolutely right intuitively on the AI. But then I guess the if the AI becomes the aggregator, if you will,
Mm. Yeah.
then you get uh you probably will see whoever's behind the AI making the arbitrage fee, or like I call it a discoverability fee when we talk about commerce and crypto, because the discoverability fee is sort of paid to, I guess, whatever the platform that might be aggregating another site's
It depends.
listings.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It
listings on.
depends. It depends on what the revenue model is, right?
Right.
Like from the point of view of the the AI.
Because my question was this. Can I just
Yeah.
ask a question?
Sure.
Would who's going to like, if that's true, I could see that happening where the AI is actually doing the aggregating kind of legwork. But if Radix is kind of building their own AI for their stack, I would think that that would be interesting. Or if there's some, I don't know enough about AI to say if you could like distribute it and like have validators, but or something similar. But like, who would be actually making the fees on top of the AI doing the legwork in Radix's case for
Yeah.
an AI that does this?
So like, does a like if you integrate something into OpenAI via an API,
Hmm.
does OpenAI take a cut of that integration?
I don't know. I think they didn't at first, maybe, and now they will. Maybe they do
No,
that.
I don't think so. I think like
Okay.
essentially what you're talking about is you're saying once you have everything on Ledger, you have this ability to have an interface, a standardized interface for transactions of value. All the AI needs to understand is A, how to read the data on that interface on the ledger, and B, how to transact via that interface. Now, you could have it that there's the each of the creators of tokens decide that there's a marketplace fee or an enablement fee or something like that they want to pass on to the AI. But ultimately, you don't need to build the AI on top of the ledger. The ledger becomes the interface by which AI can execute your economic desires.
Agreed.
And there could absolutely be ways in which the AI decides to monetize things in the background on transactions. But I think that my instinct is that when you build open permissionless interfaces, then all then the different AI creators are doing is they're competing on user convenience. And that to me, if you have an open competition for the creation of LLMs, for the creation of user preference type LLMs, you'll get different people with different business models, but ultimately the AI isn't going to stop you from being able to get one thing or another on top of these platforms, because they're not actually gating the interface, right? If eBay only allowed people to buy via AI via OpenAI, then OpenAI absolutely could charge a fee. But if you have a public ledger, which is a completely permissionless interface,
Mhm.
then you're not wall gardening it in any way. If one company comes along and says, "Hey, my AI charges you a 5% fee on everything that you buy," and then this other AI comes up and says, "No, no, no, you just pay us a monthly fee, and everything else is sorted," then people will choose what their preferences are.
Dang. So eBay and Amazon, I guess with Amazon, I would say their moat would be their warehouse infrastructure. But for a lot of e-commerce, I could see it just being done on a ledger like Radix, because you have enough else to make it feel very competitive for what's currently out there. And
Right.
what you're saying, I guess, is interesting. Yeah, I did want to hone into the revenue model because I didn't know if you were saying that like because yeah, I think I like saw it the same way when you first said it, but I just want to make sure there will naturally be the AI that does the discoverability and aggregation when you have, if you build it, they will come. We say in America, period. I know that you have the cup of tea. I don't know if you have the crumpets with you, but in America, we play baseball. You know, we have this movie Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. So if you build the, you know, the right infrastructure, obviously. But
No,
okay.
I don't think, I actually don't agree with the saying that if you build it, they will come. I think that like a lot of the time that I think the use of that phrase has become, if you build the technology, they will come.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's true. Like if you
Right.
build something that has actual utility for people, like that solves a real problem in their life,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have a way of putting it in front of people, then you can get your growth, right? So what the work that public ledgers have to do, and I count Radix in this, is work out how an increasingly number of economically relevant objects can be brought on top of public ledgers and then transacted as frictionlessly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that that is true, the more that you will get these aggregation services integrating with your platform to push business to it, right? But it's a two-way street. Like, why would a one particular or another particular AI creator integrate with a platform that has nothing useful for the end user on top of it? But you're already seeing this happen. Like, Boson Protocol is building this, is essentially working with WooCommerce store owners, and they're tokenizing the stock that these WooCommerce store owners have, and then allowing it to be transacted via public ledger. And so this is exactly the kind of distribution that's starting to come up. And as more and more of those objects come onto ledger and are offered and can be transacted successfully, you are going to see more and more people opting to go via this way, because ultimately you say Amazon's advantage is their warehouse model.
Yeah.
Like in
Okay.
many ways, Amazon's advantage is the fact that they are the everything store that can deliver everything immediately. They have everything in stock, so why would I need to go anywhere else? But that's through a massive degree of centralization. However, the world has a huge number, like all of those objects that are on Amazon exist in warehouses and other places than just Amazon. And as long as you can connect those to people, then you don't need that centralized distribution model.
Well, the reason I said that is because there's fulfillment by Amazon, which is, in my opinion, a bit of a moat when we think about
Yeah.
how to. They did what kind of Tesla did with the chargers that you guys always talk about. It's like they
Yeah.
built enough warehouse infrastructure that they own or rent or curate that all is McDonaldized, and McDonald's just had the same,
Yeah.
kind of blueprint. And I see that, and I've talked about this before, an idea where you could actually have a distributed kind of warehouse system that's also curated by like a verified institution. But that's what I think would, be the. But everything else I agree with, except for I have a rebuttal to you on Field of Dreams, because if you actually watch the movie, Pierce, they
I
had
do need to watch the movie.
they had some good stuff, man. They had some of the greatest baseball players, and they came back from the dead, so they're all kind of spirits. And they built an entire baseball park, so the whole town had a desire to do something because it was just in the middle of nowhere. They're bored. So what they actually built, I think, had the value that you're talking about, because they built some superstar baseball players who came back alive, and they would play games, and then people came because they built it. I do agree, though, the term is a cliche and it gets used in a lot of contexts.
Right. Right.
Um,
And
yeah.
it, a lot of the time, it, a lot of the time, it, and it, and it, a lot of the time, 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 it, a lot of The field, I got to watch Field of Dreams, but it's a
You
great.
should. I think you'll enjoy it. I think you will. I don't know what your favorite sport is, Pierce, but it's not like my favorite sport. Baseball is not, but
Yeah.
it's still there. It was the sport, America, Hollywood. So there's a lot of like baseball propaganda movies that were like awesome. Like they just made baseball seem like the coolest thing in the world, and that was like definitely one of them. You definitely gotta check it out, man.
Okay.
But
So the analogy is, I think, an interesting one because it sounds like they galvanized a community.
and by galvanized, can you explain that?
Yeah. So like, as in, it wasn't one person who went off into the middle of nowhere and said, "I'm going to build a baseball stadium." It was this sort of continuous rolling engagement. I'm guessing here. I haven't watched the movie, but I'm going to guess that
Yeah.
it started off with an idea, but then it had to roll into momentum of more and more people buying into that idea, by like believing it could be possible, sufficient to get the funding to do it, and then that had to keep rolling into a story that people grokked onto a narrative that people then were like, "Oh my God, they're doing this crazy thing. I want to get involved."
I would say that's definitely like what needs to be said about it. The movie's a little bit different because there is kind of one guy who's like this like you'll understand when you watch it, man. But my main point is I do agree. I think about the benefits of if you don't silo ledgers and you
Yeah,
have one. This might sound crazy, but I see a benefit that changes conversations. So there's this guy, maybe you listen to him, Robert Kiyosaki, and he told a story once, and it was that when he bought a gold mine in China, it's China's government, how it works and stuff, it was taken away from him, like they just kind of took it. So it was and he's still mad about it like to this day. But it was still kind of like, well, if people are transacting on one global ledger, or I guess what do I call it? Sometimes I try to say it like a global unified playground for monetary energy playground, because playgrounds have a bunch of different stuff that you can do, and so do smart contract platforms. And if somebody buys a gold mine on this ledger, I wonder if there is going to be a transition from, this sounds crazy, I know, from nations all, sort of having their own property rights that they maybe through governance create, and something more intrinsic to each individual because they have a proof that they own something on this ledger. And it's not so easy to see, China kind of come in and like, if it's distributed, it's going to be really tough too to just kind of take that away from them. So I think there's like a deep philosophical conversation change on property rights when you do everything on one ledger versus like a bunch, if everyone adopts the same one, because now we're all in the same thing. Does that what do you think? Do you think that's far-fetched? Do you think that maybe is a little bit too crazy? What do you think?
no, I don't. I think that the the amalgamation of the state and the network is absolutely going to happen. Like, Balaji is the network state is probably a much better sort of description of that than I would give here.
Hmm.
But ultimately, you still need the violence layer. Have you ever heard that expression?
The what? The
The
violence?
violence, the violence layer.
Okay. I haven't.
Like,
That's is great intel.
a
Okay, the
nation
violence.
state has many monopolies, but its most important monopoly is the monopoly on violence,
Hmm.
right? And ultimately, what that means is that the nation state is the backstop to property rights.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're the ones that have the police, they have the army, and they are the ones that, as a result of their military, um, power, the ability to prevent external forces from taking what they believe is belongs to them, and their ability to prevent others, their citizens, from taking things by violence from each other.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the ability to enforce property rights. Then you go to the next layer, which is what is the rule of law? And is the rule of law naturally fair within the country? And you know, there are many cases where the rule of law isn't. The state has the monopoly right on violence, and then they use that monopoly right to take things from people, such as your example of a gold mine being taken from a man in China, or a man who had a gold mine in China.
Mm-hmm.
You can put whatever you want on top of a public ledger.
Mm-hmm.
You can say via that public ledger that this thing belongs to someone versus someone else, and that's absolutely going to happen, right? All property rights will be on public ledgers. I have absolutely, I can see absolutely no argument as to why that wouldn't happen
If the ledger can scale, I think
if the ledger can scale.
I mean, like the
I mean,
first.
you're talking about the reason that we built Radix,
I
right? Like,
know, I know, I know. But that's why
yeah,
I'm secretly most bullish on Rad. It's just like I don't want to be one of these guys that just goes around because it's I feel for Radix because it's so far ahead, but like it's obviously just launched smart contracts. It's kind of like people might see it as behind, but it's so far ahead because there was so much thought to build it in a way that made sense to be not like uh, that I feel for Radix because like I get it. There's a lot of noise, and I really am like secretly most bullish on Radix, but I don't ever want to be too like hypey because in this industry we've gone through like multiple cycles where we just see that hype all the time, and I don't know how you feel about that, but for me I feel like that can lead to people that don't know much about this tech just kind of getting swept in or like, hard eyes. And I always try to like, be calm about it. But yeah, what you guys are building is sick. I mean, that is factually correct. I'm very excited to see it kind of go through. But prop,
and like
oh, yeah.
what we're talking about here, I know that they all sort of like it does feel like abstract when we're talking about, you know, sort of the merging of the state with the network state, the creation of all economic objects on Ledger, the ability for everyone to transact instantaneously on anything that they desire via that interface, the sort of the idea of this being this unified economic platform. But that was our starting point. When we were building Radix, we were going, look, what does the future look like? The future, in our opinion, is everything that is of economic value, and everything that is to do with commerce and trade and GDP, and everything that represents rights, to do with property rights, to do with intellectual property, to do with identity, to do with governance, to do with voting. Everything is going to be on top of public ledger. And like, if that's true, then you're talking about something that is almost incomprehensibly larger than what we have now in terms of its necessity for throughput. And I always talk about this idea,
Hmm.
you know, when the internet was first getting started and you tried to sell someone on the idea of the internet, you had said, hey, I've got this new thing, and it means that I can talk to anyone in the world instantly, and I can send anyone in the world information, books, articles, whatever I want, instantly. And the people then would have gone, yeah, but I can do that already. I can just pick up the phone and I can talk to anyone in the world. I can use my fax machine and I can fax someone any piece of information that I want to. How is the internet better than what we have today? And the early versions of the internet, the early things that you saw on the internet were just basically there's this concept in design called skeuomorphism, right? And skeuomorphism is when you make something digital look like something physical so that people instantly understand what it is. So the fact that your save icon in a computer is a little picture of a floppy drive, right? Or the fact that you're, when you want to put something in the trash to delete it, you're putting it in a little trash bin on your desktop. That design format is called skeuomorphism. It doesn't have to be. It could have been, you could have had a little like random green blob that was the trash bin, but no one would understand what that meant. And so when you looked in the early days of the internet, everything was skeuomorphic to real life. It was like, oh, we've got a newspaper, so we'll just put up a newspaper online, right? And there's all of these companies that were doing these things where you could just turn the page like you would a real book. And that wasn't what a website was actually capable of. It was because people didn't have the frame of reference. And so if you went to someone then and you said to them, what's the total bandwidth requirements of the internet? They would have gone, well, what are the total number of phone calls and faxes that are sent today? It's probably like 2 or 3x that. But actually, it hasn't. It's been, a million x that, maybe more. And that's the same thing that I see with these public ledgers. Like the capacity of these public ledgers doesn't need to be Visa, it doesn't need to be MasterCard, doesn't need to be NASDAQ. It has to be multiples, hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of multiples over the transactions that we do today, because of what will be opened up as possible when you put all of these things on top of public ledger. So that was the starting point for our design.
So I'll give you a couple quick things here. First of all, I reached out to Piers and Adam at the same time. I gotta say, really appreciate RDX Works out there, because we got they sent us the CEO instead of the CMO first. I hope to do a podcast with Adam, but I do think that that's professional for the Jspeak podcast. And I only mention that because it goes back to why I asked the first question. It's like I don't think I think like if some folks might be like too hyped, and then I try to sit in a place where I agree that this is so serious and has so much potential, but like let's be realistic about that in the current moment. And if this does what you guys want it to do, then I would suspect that the influence of some of you guys who are core to the protocol will just be massive. So that's why I asked that at the beginning. But
Yeah.
there's
But
one.
it's an interesting point, right? Like maybe not, right? In
Oh,
some ways, in some ways, the point of a decentralized public ledger is that you don't have to have that one person. Like it is
I agree.
a decentralized public good, right? And so
But
I think,
isn't
yeah.
Radix isn't in my opinion though, Radix did this on purpose where you guys are right now, especially yourself and Dan Hughes, I would say, will it's not like, or especially Dan Hughes, I don't know actually, Piers, like how long do you plan to be like, really making this thing happen? Because some CEOs do different things. Sometimes they'll go on vacation, or like, they might
Go on
sell,
vacation. Sometimes they go on vacation. One
they might
vacation every
sell
3 years.
well, they might sell something. They might sell their, whatever their positions and stuff, and move on. But I did hear, I think Dan speak about this, maybe in the Justin Bonds interview, and he was talking about how he wants to maintain some kind of like, just so that way, like the person that really built this thing can continue to guide it. And I think that's smart because of how long lasting this tech could potentially be. Like
Right.
we don't know if this is gonna last 100 years till something else, blows our mind, or like 300. And I just think that's kind of where you went with that. So that's why I think that some of you guys might have a significant amount of influence, even though Radix is where it's at, because I can feel it, man. Like Radix will eventually just like be in the spotlight, especially if everything goes well up till Zion. So I'm not like worried. It's just, yeah, there's gonna be a moment like that. So I was curious, what would you do with that influence? And you answered it, but yeah, any other
Yeah.
thoughts, feel free.
I think that reflects what I plan to do with the rest of my life, right? Like
Yeah.
I see this I don't see this as a short-term journey. I see this as being able to do something that has real meaning over my entire lifetime, because we've started the crypto space started with a small group of outsiders, right? It started with the cypherpunks, like people who were literally like going to prison because the government was trying to shut down people's right to encryption. And it started as a movement that believed that it is possible to remove arbitrary power from centralized authorities. They saw a path very early where technology could become this panopticon, this ability to observe everyone at all times in all things, and that an individual's right to self-sovereignty, self-determination, and privacy was critical to fight for, because the governments weren't going to give it and corporations weren't going to give it. And I see that this technology has every possibility of being as disruptive. I mean, it's not every possibility. It will be more disruptive than the internet. And the reason it'll be more disruptive than the internet, because it deals with stuff that the internet was only proximate to power. But when you're talking about the money and the trade of the world, when you're talking about the GDP of nations, and when you're talking about eventually the way in which people vote and decide who leads, that's essentially what you're talking about when you're talking about this technology. And at every single step, this technology has an opportunity to be co-opted, has an opportunity to be essentially banned or removed from people's ability to use it. And the only way that we can make sure that doesn't happen is by advocating for it every step of the way. And this, when you were saying, what if I had a lot of influence, what would I do today? Today, I would just want
Because
the
this is a
people.
good thing for humanity. So if you had a lot of influence, that advocating for it and having a bit of a change of perspective, or just awareness, broadening the awareness 10x, 1000x, whatever it is, it would be the way to solve for this never happening. And if it's a
Right.
good thing, then it should happen. So if you
It's
don't,
much harder to take things away from people once they realize they want it, rather than take things away from people before they even realize they wanted it in the first place. So like ultimately governments are most governments, not all governments, but most governments are are responsible to responding to their populace, right? Are voted in by their populace. And the popular opinion on something often dictates policy. Not always, but often dictates policy. And so I think that the best thing that can happen to the world is the world for crypto to remove its current narrative outside of the crypto space of this is where scams happen, this is this is drug money, this is money laundering. I mean, like you saw the interview with Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan at Davos, being like, yeah, Bitcoin is a pet rock used for money laundering. Like that narrative is still a big narrative that many people are continuing to talk about, and part of that is a way of keeping the technology from getting to the point where it's inevitable that everyone wants it.
I mean, Jamie Dimon, like, if we're talking about, governments or banks, right? It's like this technology is definitely going to replace a lot of legacy systems or at least augment a lot. But, you know, these sometimes those narratives are, purposely said, even if the person that says it doesn't believe it. Not saying that Jamie Dimon didn't believe what he was saying. I don't know. But it does sometimes happen. So there's a comment that you made though, Piers. It's funny because you made a few comments early, and we have more topics. We'll have more than enough topics, but there was something that you made me realize. Going back to the gold mine example, the possibility for someone to own something on a ledger but not physically have the rights to it has shown up already. I mean, we see this in art with NFTs. We see like, okay, you got to, okay, like the early, things, right? And this was a gift, by the way, but it was kind of just like, hey, by the way, guys, if you want to buy this digital painting, because I have the real one in my own house and this is the only one that I'll make, but like, there's not the cohesive infrastructure to really connect physical and digital yet. So we run into this paradigm, and I'm going to ask how it, Radix, or you plan to maybe solve this, or what your thoughts are, because maybe we're thinking about it the wrong way, where you have physical items, right? And what's really cool about Radix, in my opinion, is the digital identity solution, is personas, because just having the email and I don't know, an address gives you the ability to have a tracking number if you hook up to some freight carriers, and obviously send some physical thing to your house. But the fact that we have physical assets, commodities, real estate, whatever, and we have a ledger that could be globally used, could create some discrepancies with who owns something on the ledger versus who doesn't, and the enforcement at the jurisdiction or the violence layer, I guess. It seems like that could present a challenge, though. Like there could be challenges where things are disputed. I don't know. That's how I view it.
Yeah, I mean, like,
How's
I
all
think
that
that
work?
there are many different roads to what you're talking about. There isn't one. Like one of the
Okay.
things that we thought about really early when we were designing Radix was what are the most important objects um on top of public ledgers.
Yeah.
And the two things that we came back with was identity and ownership, right?
Mm,
The ability to prove identity and to share identity, and the ability to prove ownership and transfer ownership
mhm,
were the core primitives of these public ledgers. That was the core difference between what the internet is and what a public ledger is, like Radix. So the first thing we did is we built the Radix engine. And what the Radix engine does is it makes it incredibly easy for people to create representations of objects that can be transferred, right? So we have the Radix engine framework that makes it incredibly easy to create tokenized representations of anything, to create NFT representations of anything, and to transfer them in a way that is safe and efficient and quick. Then you've got this identity layer. Now, identity is one of these things that you want to keep private. It isn't something that you necessarily want to have a public representation of. And so we realized that the identity layer needed to match up with the ability to verify stuff on Ledger without needing to have all of the information on Ledger in the first place. That's why personas are just, I'm very excited by personas. They're a little baby feature at the moment on the Radix Ledger, but they will
right.
become more and more
Oh, I
important.
can't wait to see what kind of fields you guys come up with too, past the ones even you've talked about. But
Yeah,
uh,
but it won't even be just fields. It's also the ability to do things like verifiable credentials, right? Like not only I can pass my name over right now in personas, but what if I can pass my name over and at the same time pass over a proof that that's been validated by the
uh,
UK government,
yeah, central authority. Yeah.
some more central authority, right? And so it's this idea of being able to present proofs via an off-ledger mechanism that can be connected to an on-ledger mechanism or can be validated via an on-ledger process. That means that you're able to square the circle on both identity and ownership. But going back to what you were talking about, like this idea of how do you connect digital with physical? It really depends on the complexity of the object, right?
Right.
So some objects you're not gonna add, an expensive object, you can add a NFC device into it that is unseparatable, that you can validate on ledger. And like this is already happening with items of fashion, it's already happening with, you know, goods and services, sorry, with goods like mobile phones and stuff like that. But then the other part of it is like it's not that you just tokenize something, but it's what the token represents.
Hmm.
And being able to make the token represent a legal right in the same way that you would enforce a contract.
The same physics or behaviors. Yeah. It's like the same physics or behaviors, like you can, I think that's what you mean, Piers, right? Like adding behaviors so that way the physical can actually act on the ledger, like how, or like the digital can actually act on the ledger like how it would physically, because it would be the
No,
same.
no, no. What I mean is right now, if I buy 10 bushels of corn,
Yeah, you
how
like.
can I prove how do I prove that I own those 10 bushels of corn? Well, I have a contract.
Hmm,
What does the contract say? Well, the contract says that me and the counterparty signed it, and under the terms of this agreement, I own these 10 bushels of corn, right? That's how it's done today. Forget public ledgers. You have a legal agreement that is enforceable in court that I can present and say, hey, I own this, give them to me.
okay,
And then you have the violence layer, right? If you don't give me my 10 bushels of corn, then I go to court. And then the court will say, hey, give him his 10 bushels of corn. And if he says no, then the court will then say, okay, well, this is now going to be, it's going to be enforced.
right.
You you will find that in some way you will get the value of the underlying or the underlying.
In some way,
Yeah,
because I eat the corn by the time that the government comes for me to give it back to the person, and they'll still get the value another way by
you'll
having
still get the value another way.
a
Make you sell your house, like whatever. Like the courts have very, very broad ranging powers. And I don't think you'll ever get rid of the violence layer,
you
the
don't.
necessity for no,
You don't?
I don't
Okay.
think that's possible.
I
Because
think I could.
if I have physical control of something,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what a digital ledger says. I have physical control of it,
Yeah.
right? Like if you pay me $10 to buy this water bottle, and then I refuse to give you the water bottle,
Uh-huh.
like it doesn't matter if this has an NFT that I've transferred it to you.
Well,
I still have the water bottle.
that's fair enough, and maybe you're right. I guess I see some separation of like you know, just moving towards a more global sovereignty, like more global sovereignty. I think if there's a spectrum of everyone's sovereignty on Earth, the and right now we're maybe like here or here in different places. I think we're all gonna move up in the level of in amount of sovereignty we have. So I just don't know if that leads to, you know, like this take will be wrong by the time I'm dead. But maybe after, I think it could happen, like where we have more institutions than we do governments. And I don't know if that's going to happen. I think it could happen though, because of, but I see what you're saying, Piers. I don't know if yeah, I
I mean,
don't.
I think that like, do you think a DAO? Do you think of a DAO as an institution?
No, not today. Because like DAO infrastructure isn't really, I think, facilitating all the needs that, and it depends what type of institution, of course, right? But if an institution has a certain amount of things that they can do, or like certain needs that they can meet, then I don't think DAOs can compete today. I think there still needs to be more infrastructure towards DAOs to maybe have that. And then maybe I don't know what you're talking about with personas. I think is really an important piece of infrastructure for that, because you still need citizens to be able to be like, hey, this is who I am and stuff, but not have it be seen by people to be like an official or like voted in to a one of these like verified institutions. I
I
don't.
think
Yeah.
my point is that um if 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 we're saying that DAOs have the capability of becoming institutions, which I think they
Fair.
do,
Yeah. That's,
then
yeah.
then I would probably agree with you. There will be more institutions than governments, but I think that governments will eventually just become DAOs anyway. Like I think that
Yeah.
that is the end state of government. But
That's great.
just going back to what we were talking about before, like the reason that I, outside of the concept of fair dealing, right, and being a upstanding person with which to do business, the reason that I will respect a contract that is signed that says I will give you a thing is because I know that the violence layer works. I know that enforcement works. So
Right.
the majority of business, probably 99.9% of business, is never litigated. It's never disputed. Like, it is resolved between the parties before it ever ends up in court. And that is because that system works. So
Mhm.
there always has to be an enforcement layer. However, my point that I'm making here is that how we do the legal contracting
Yeah.
doesn't have to be how it is today. Like, if we end up either by legislation or just by private agreement saying that ownership of a physical good passes absolutely with the passing of the digital representation of it, and
Mhm.
either we build a set of contracts or rules or things like that are adhered to, or legislation just passes and says if you own the NFT version of something, if you have the tokenized version of it, you are de facto the owner of it. Then
You
all
have,
of the things that you're talking about are possible. Like
yeah.
you then don't have this problem of matching up physical with digital. All you need is an enforceable right that says if I own the digital representation, I also own the physical representation. As soon as you have that, then you have everything. You have every possibility. You have the ability to have everything represented as a tokenized version of itself, and everything to be transacted via that tokenized version of itself.
Yeah, I've thought a lot about what would make the violence layer, even desire to be like part of this whole world with crypto and stuff. And I think after I listened to Dan Hughes once when he was on one of our spaces, and I really think that there's some merit to what he was saying around if you get the adoption first, then legacy systems will kind of, because why I'm even thinking about that is you still need the violence layer um, to back up whatever we make that may be the infrastructure to easily transact.
Right.
And
Because
having,
as soon as people can renege on deals, as soon as you have one time where someone transfers a digital object that's supposed to be connected to a physical object and it doesn't ultimately get resolved and the person keeps it, then you have no trust in the system anymore.
and when you don't have the violence layer, you almost would be more looking at certain places in the world where there's self-governance, and maybe that's through like a mafia or a gang. And like it happens. I mean, it's true.
Right.
Like that's what
Yeah.
so, so the violence layer has always kind of been there maybe in human history if you want a town to exist and businesses to exist, because even those mafias, or depending on which ones, I'm not saying everyone is like this, but some of them keep the area governed or nice and clean, and then they do all their other stuff in other places, but they don't do it kind of in their own vicinities.
Right. And you are literally describing why society generally accepts that the government has a monopoly on violence. Because as soon as it doesn't, and you have militias and you have local uh,
Cartels,
cartels and things like that,
yeah.
then you have a descent into anarchy in one form or another. Often, not always, but often you have a descent into anarchy in one form or another, because essentially those who have power are in a position to favor themselves over others, which is why we have so many layers of bureaucracy and transparency and audit and all this kind of stuff in government. So I don't I think these are like the full anarchic system where you have private armies or private forces of some description that are enforcing sort of agreements. I think that's actually a lot more dystopian than you have a transparent, representative, and ultimately answerable to the populace
Mhm.
system of government. Like,
Yeah.
I do think these things, I think they merge together. I think there are many things that are wrong with governments today and many ways in which governments could be improved. And this is why I think that governments and DAOs will merge eventually.
Yeah,
You
that's
have this.
interesting that you said that. Okay. Yeah. So you see it more of like we're gonna kind of slowly sort of I guess it's more augmentation than complete restructuring. It's more
It can be both. It
it
can
can
be
be a little
both.
bit of both. Okay.
And the reason it's both
I
is
like
because,
that.
you know, if you read Balaji's The Network State, he's convinced that we are now entering into an era where it is possible to start new states, to create new countries.
Yeah.
And so that I think you're going to see this emergent idea of startup nations. And as soon as you have this emergent idea of startup nations, the next question is how is that nation going to govern? And how that nation is going to govern is almost certainly going to be tech forwards, especially if you know technology exists like Radix, like public ledgers that allow people to do things in a way that is different from how they were done before. So I think you're going to see both. You're going to see
Mm.
startup nations emerging. Those startup nations are going to have to work out the violence layer, the governance layer. They're also going to have to work out public goods and public goods funding, like, you know, healthcare, education, schools, all this kind of stuff. But they're also going to have to, you
Yeah,
know,
they're
and
gonna
it all
need to
requires
make
money.
money. Yeah, the nation needs to make their own money to almost buy their own military or whatever else a nation would need to protect its nationhood,
Right,
right? So they're going to
right.
need some revenue, which means that they need to provide some kind of value, solve some kind of problem, and create some kind of uh, like commerce. So I almost feel like Radix could be a nation more so than any other startup nation could if they don't provide any usefulness. Like
Yeah.
at least Radix has the usefulness. I'm not saying Radix these like we don't need to all go and I don't know, Piers, if you want to. I mean we can, but we don't need to go create a nation. Like it's up to you. But
No,
I'm
but I think people will create nations, and I think they will do that using the Radix stack.
oh, you do.
Because
So
yeah,
Radix will be the mother that births a bunch of digital nations more so than Radix becoming its own through its own treasury and
yes,
funding.
exactly. Like Radix will be the platform on which new nations can build. Like because you have the things you need, right? Like you have identity and ownership as core primitives of the platform, and you to be a citizen of a nation, first you have to be identified. And then you have to continually prove your identity for things like voting, for things like benefits and healthcare, for things like, you know, sort of choice around taxation and representation. Like all of those things are primitives that we built into Radix, the very primitives that allow you to build that and do it in a way that can be privacy preserving as well,
Well,
and have the ability to enforce ownership and to allow things to be tokenized and transacted. Yeah, like it's the perfect stack for that if you're wanting to build.
a nation because like what nations didn't have long ago was they couldn't charge like and I'm again looking at Radix, but I think you're right about the DAO comment because or I think you're right, but I also think that Radix would be the better nation because the tax in the nation runs itself through validators and the validators are making this tax and the money is sort of I don't know how long you guys plan to burn the fees, but at least right now there is this burning that's happening too to each fee. So
Sure.
I don't know, it kind of feels as though that is yeah, because with cash, physical cash, we can't just pay tax like that. We have to like, you know, physical cash, okay, maybe I'll, you know, whatever, I'll pay the taxes. If somebody just gives me cash on the table, maybe I don't pay the taxes. But there's like this concept that people in sort of mainstream crypto talk about a lot, which is the taxation, immediate taxation.
Yeah.
Do you think about that at all? Because I know that we're talking about a few different things here, but governments do tax, and the ability for CBDCs to immediately tax has come up a lot. It's been very controversial. Every time that we process a payment, it's like, oh, they could just take a micro tax, I think they call it sometimes.
I am look, when startup nations emerge, they are going to need to work out ways in which those startup nations are funded and how they're funded on an ongoing basis, and how that funding is then funneled back into the nation to help improve the lives of its citizens and improve its possible future growth in GDP, right? I am unopinionated on the ways in which people decide to enforce taxation. It's not something that is at the radix layer, right? What we're talking about, a nation state is essentially an application on top of the radix ledger. So the radix ledger itself doesn't have any particular opinion about whether or not there should be a transaction on there should be a tax on every single transaction within that nation. If they want to build that in, they can, right? The tools that are available on Radix allows them to do that. But it's not something that I'm going to say, yes, I think that tax on every transaction should be applied, or, I think that tax should be applied this way or that way. I think that many new startup nations will rethink the concept of tax entirely, because I think that how tax is done right now has created a lot of
Inefficiencies.
inefficiencies, unexpected outcomes, all of this kind of stuff. So
What
like,
about, what about
this is the design space that people can play in.
what if Joe Biden comes up to you and he's like, Piers, or whoever's the president of the United States, he's like, listen, Radix,
Trump.
we
It's going
want
to be
to
Trump.
Trump. Yeah. So Trump comes up and he's like, Piers, Radix is great. And it's just kind of like,
Great, so great.
so what if the US comes to you and says, listen, we will implement Radix in everything on every level. And we
Yeah.
love what you guys are building. However, you need to do one thing for us. You need to accept a stable coin that is, this US dollar stable coin, and you have to pay your validators fees with that as well as XRD.
I mean, obviously the answer would be no.
Okay.
But the reason for that is that the world is bigger than the United States.
Yeah.
And,
What if
as
all
soon as
okay, then I think your answer will be the same, but biggest nations, the world comes to Radix with the top 10 currencies, and there's a conversation of like, we don't really want to support this thing because it's got its own currency unless ours can have some benefit or utility on this platform too, because the ledger itself is the value now, and it's doing a lot of stuff that we were doing as a nation for people that now we're not. So
Yeah.
it feels kind of like you guys are sort of stealing our thunder, and we want to, so the answer would still be, or maybe it'd be, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean the answer in that case would be it's not up to me, right? Like this
Okay.
this is a decision that the network has to make.
Yeah.
And the way that we built the stack means that the Radix token is not special on Radix. The Radix token is a token that is created in the way that every single other token is created on Radix. So if the node runners wanted to update the ability to pay fees on the network to not just be XRD, but to be XRD in any of the currencies of these 10 nations or 100 nations that are issuing on top of
It's
Radix.
possible. Yeah, it's 100% possible, but
100% possible. It's not from a implementation point of view, not a complicated problem.
I agree.
The question is more,
Do you want
is that what the network wants? And
right.
I think that it could either be a very long discussion or a very short discussion. I don't think it'll be anywhere in between.
I think validators might be cool with it, but I think stakeholders would be the reason why that conversation would get rather long or maybe intense. I think people that hold the XRD token, for example, unless there's a lot of things that could happen. So anyways, I don't want to.
No, but like ultimately, the power of the Radix technology only emerges by adoption.
Yes. Yeah.
And so if we want adoption, then we have to work out ways in which adoption can be achieved as quickly as possible. Now, obviously, that's a great way of pushing adoption.
I,
And I think that, yeah, as I say, I think it still would be a long conversation, because there is still this idea that I think there's still this idea in crypto, which is crypto versus the world, right? Crypto versus government. Um, and I think that there's good reason for it to be like that, because it's essentially developed its own defense mechanisms. But ultimately, if you want the world using your platform,
it can't be
it
against.
can't be an outside thing. It has to be a fully integrated thing. So
Yeah. I think about your comments around adoption. I think this is a big one. You know, it's funny. I got a few DMs before I did this interview. There was I don't know if does this mean anything to you? Half Greek god, half Barry. Does that, because that's a guy, Hermes. He sends
oh
a,
yes, yeah.
you know, Hermes. Okay. So he sends a ton of intel. Shout out to Hermes. So he said, you know, wish you luck for Piers's interview and stuff. But the community has been great for me. I've been doing spaces. I did about 20 spaces since I think, I don't know, the fall, and each one is once a week, just on Fridays usually. But you know, just meeting with the community, the different people involved, the builders, the validators, even the stakeholders, they're all kind of interested in what you said, adoption, because I think they're aligned around the mission. And to get adoption is the talk of, you know, a lot of the spaces that we do, but it's sort of not just like like exclusive to Radix, but Radix sits uniquely in the spot of needing to break through this noise while having like I would say that the products that Radix is starting to have are at least competitive at like a functional level. There's a lot of, you know, if you're familiar with Ethereum, obviously, so you know how much documentation that ecosystem has. You know, like, okay, we have some really interesting user maybe interfaces, but the UX is the wallet on Radix. That's, I think, the one of the killer features of Radix. But when it comes to adoption, I don't think that what I've seen all the time is people just copy what dApps are on the bigger ecosystems into new architectures. So that's sort of
yeah,
started to happen.
yes,
But
very much so.
what's the next sort of thing that will happen then is maybe some sort of true innovation. And I think
Yep.
that's where the composability and atomic composability or atomic commitment of Radix is going to maybe feel novel. I think that that has the potential to be the most novel thing. What do you think the most novel thing is, or how would you even like to proceed with this sort of framing of Radix is where it's at today, a lot of noise in the market. We're talking about adoption. So, like, I think there does need to be a bit of that novelty on the application side, even though there's a lot of foreshadowing of great stuff. You know, the personas and the wallet already is, you know, it's good stuff. So I like it. But from that novelty, Piers, you're talking about history. Look at Pong. Pong, that was a game built off novelty. And I think that is a point that people forget sometimes. It's like novelty brings adoption. I mean, it does. Like novelty really does. I mean, DeFi for Ethereum, that was really novel the first time I used it. Compound Aave, that made me stoked for like 3 months. And then I was like, wait a sec, there might be cheaper fees over there. And oh, wait a sec, there might be ways to do like not lose our funds over here. So, yeah, adoption. Let's talk about adoption for a few minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there is your Radix is now speed running the history of crypto to date, right?
Yeah.
So for it to be possible to get adoption, there are certain things that have to be solved, right? One of which is you need to have stable coins on your platform. The next is you need to have the basic applications that are necessary, such as lending and borrowing and trading. Then you need to start having new types, new asset types, new projects that are interesting to maintain, you know, sort of community engagement, meme coins, you know, gates, little gambling applications, all of this kind of stuff. Then you start to get sort of to the next level of sophistication. So you look thinking about derivatives and options, and really what those things are is those are risk hedging instruments. They are abilities for people to take much more sophisticated risk adjusted views on how they interact with stuff. Then you're looking at things like custody. And I haven't even mentioned exchange integrations here, but like exchange listings are critical as well, because exchange listings provide at the moment the best on and off ramping platforms for being able to get into and out of crypto. And those stepping stones, in many ways, Ethereum is still going down that road. Solana is still going down that road.
Yeah.
We haven't got to the point where every single shop will accept a stable coin as payment instead of cash.
Yeah.
We haven't got to the point yet where it is possible to transact as easily in USDC with a business as it is with cash. And the reason that's important is because a lot of the problems start and stop with the last mile. And what I mean by that is that for me to use a smart contract to execute something, both parties have to be okay with receiving what results out of that smart contract. And what comes out of that smart contract has to be a crypto native object. So like the real innovation, really the real innovation only starts when you start getting real businesses and real people who are completely okay with transacting in stable coins
And that
and
is,
crypto objects. And
yeah,
that's still a few years away. That's still a few years away. Circle, Tether are doing their best to accelerate that, and USDC and USDT is becoming more adopted in more places. I think there's a huge space there
yeah,
for new types of stable coins,
I think you're right.
which have much easier on and off ramping than the current ones do. But ultimately, what we're seeing today are is bounded by that last mile consideration.
Mm.
And this goes back to the whole thing of you saying, if you had influence, what would you do? It'd be like, get people comfortable with Web3, because if they're comfortable with Web3, then they're comfortable with receiving tokens as representations of value.
Yeah.
So, where's the real innovation coming from? What is happening on Radix right now, as I say, is speed running the history of crypto to date. Getting stable coins and wrapped assets on, getting dexes and lending markets, getting meme coins, getting games, but it's doing it at a far faster rate than has happened historically, because of that incredible easy to use developer experience, because of that incredible easy to use user experience, and because of that sort of incredibly secure and scalable underlying architecture. But like, to answer your question, like what's going to happen on Radix that is completely unique and different, I think that the answer is going to come soon, and I don't know
Yeah,
what
I
it
saw
is. I'm
your
just
video.
very
Yeah,
excited. I'm just very excited
I
to
am.
see what it's going to
Well,
be, right?
I mean, I think something about commerce actually will be it more than I don't know, we'll see. But yeah, right now I would answer that question by saying we're in Babylon. It seems like Radix is doing things smartly to still get, I think developers. I don't think there's a demand for validators, and I think you want users by having stuff. So I think developers is still kind of that. And Project Ignition to me, I think will be good for developer adoption. And I say that because I think developers look at things like liquidity, and where they can maybe build is dictated sometimes by how much, liquidity is floating around. But the last thing that I guess I noticed about where Radix is today in terms of adoption is there's folks that feel like me probably that are still like, I believe that, I've heard from good authority that the TG for Cassandra is all pumped and things are going really well. And I guess for me, I'm always still gonna want to see this live before I'm like fully like convinced. So I think there's some people that are probably waiting to adopt Radix till this like linear scalability with like atomic composability or commitment. It's that
You
claim.
keep saying that. You're fine saying atomic composability. You don't
Am I?
have to correct
Okay.
yourself to
No, thank
commitment.
you so much because I don't like saying that extra part.
Right.
It's just like so much more natural. Just
Atomic composability is fine.
composability.
Like I think
Great word.
for if you're referencing what was discussed on the Justin Bonds podcast, really the point that Dan was making, that atomic commitment is atomic composability within his definition of
With a,
atomic composability
with a sharded network too, because
with the sharded network.
the atomic commitment happens naturally in uncharted networks when blocks propagate. But yeah, no, but anyways, atomic composability is more fun to say. And
Atomic composability, yes. I think that sort of like the answer to that question is an interesting one. Ultimately, a public ledger's adoption is more than just scalability. A public ledger's adoption comes down to its utility, right? How useful is it for the people that care about using it? And that's why we launched Scripto, the Radix engine, and the wallet before completing our work on Xi'an, because without building that adoption, that user base, without getting it in the hands of people and testing it out and stuff like that, like you're potentially building a castle in the middle of nowhere, or a baseball stadium in the middle of nowhere.
and you don't have the power to resurrect the greatest baseball players in history, too.
And we unfortunately don't have the power to resurrect, the great. I don't know who they've chosen, but the greatest baseball players in history. Get some Babe Ruth in there or something like that. So yeah, like adoption is a game of increments. It's not a game of. It's not a big bang game. It's a game of just doing the hard yards, continually building getting new people adopting your technology, getting the people who've adopted it, building more stuff that's interesting and fun to use, and building out a continuous sort of um, um, growing swell of adoption. Like I think a lot of people like to think of adoption as like a silver bullet. Tomorrow.
I do too, man. Thank you so much for saying this. Yeah.
Right.
Like it's like everybody's screaming for adoption, but you need the stuff that they will adopt too.
Right.
You can't
Right.
just have
Right.
them all come to the, I mean,
Exactly.
we can't all
It's essentially a two-sided marketplace. Like a public ledger is a two-sided marketplace. You need the users, but you also need the things that bring the users in the first place. And it's just a steady game of making sure that those two sides balance.
I'm not really worried about the adoption. I know some people are, so that's why I bring it up. But I am interested. I guess we'll see what the unique use cases are in Radix that populate. I really think again it's going to be marketplace like the walled gardens that we sometimes put between dApps. I think is actually like one of the um, it's counterintuitive to do that, and we're still maybe it's intuitive to do that because of Web 2, but I think we're still building things in a business like, hey, I got this business now and I'm gonna run and operate it. But with Web 3, you're in an ecosystem, and the whole ecosystem is actually touch points for your business. I look at it as so it's more fluid, so you can actually I don't know, like there's some magic to be discovered with that when we really just I don't know if the whole ecosystem is like your business, but you just maybe operate in certain parts of it during the day. I don't know. It's kind of like that's why I think marketplaces are already sort of sometimes competing for things like listings for NFTs, and then you see the monopoly. But if that marketplace can if more marketplaces can populate, some are specific for certain things, some are home like department store marketplaces, I call them, like just big department, they sell everything. They'll sell the music NFTs, the metaverse NFTs, they'll sell them all. But then there's probably going to be things that are very specific and niche. And
I think that the first marketplaces that are going to emerge are going to be intellectual property and digital rights. Like I think that
ooh, that's cool.
getting into physical is much more difficult. I think it's much more likely that you're going to see, you know,
Airline
Taylor Swift.
tickets. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I was saying airline tickets.
No, I mean like Taylor Swift deciding to tokenize one of her songs and then all of the royalties from that song being fractionalized and people being able to own a fraction of a Taylor Swift song. Like the NFTs in 2021, 2022 are the precursors to much more complicated and interesting things that have like an overlap to real world assets. But when I say real world assets, I mean digital real world assets. And I think digital real world assets like music rights, film rights, and things that have like real revenue that occurs from them, but can be represented digitally and transacted digitally. Those I think are going to be the next sort of like big hitters from a real world asset space. But I think that
Hmm.
you're still going to see things like meme coins, things like yield farming, things like, you know, sort of derivatives and stuff like that. They're going to be the ones where most of the assets go in this bull run. But long term, I think you're going to start to see these sort of like more and more of these actual digital assets that have real world impact, like a music track, coming to public ledgers as well. I'm going to have to go very shortly.
Okay, okay, that's totally fine, Piers. Do you want to let me ask this then, because I disagree with you on that last point on one regard. Okay.
Sure.
I disagree because I personally think that the creator economy will also be important to consider. And I think the creator economy can emerge off the top of a wallless, like, let's say, how do you even say it? Like, this ledger has so many marketplaces that all share the same exact listings, but the listings themselves are all made by, collection creators for NFTs.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I think that the need for having marketplaces that can show a genre of NFTs the way that it needs to be shown is something that the industry is sleeping on, because I think music NFTs need to look and feel different than other types. I think that metaverse parcel NFTs showed us this, because you have like land location specific. So it can't just look like an eBay listing. You need a heat map to really show where it is. And I believe what you're saying is true, but I think that you're going to have YouTubers who will be able to Shopify and make a marketplace and tap into listings globally. Whatever listings other marketplaces have, I think they should have. And I only disagree because that's a dramatic shift from what we're already seeing, where marketplaces are competing for listings. So I guess because I've been thinking about this recently and you have to go, I didn't know that you were running short. I'm sorry about that. But I guess I would like to throw that at you and say, like, do you disagree with that, like, global listing, architecture decision, or do you think it shouldn't be like that?
I think that there is some really interesting infrastructure that can be built there. What you need is essentially an abstraction layer where you are saying, I have a way of presenting something as an open offer, and that open offer can be listed on many places, and the first person to take that open offer is the one that gets filled. I think it's a really interesting potential primitive. But yes, I think curation, and this goes back to what we were talking about, like sort of filtering, an AI filtering your preferences. I think that um, marketplaces which are curated in some way, but don't have to fight for listing, they
They
can
don't
just
have to
list
fight
it.
for share. And we shouldn't be fighting for listings, because we should be fighting for user experience, brand. Um, we should be fighting on that level. When you fight on listing level, you can create monopolies, and
Yeah,
monopolies can stifle innovation. And with
yeah,
and this whole technology is to eliminate the walled gardens.
yeah.
It's the whole deal. So I just wanted to see that. There's a few other things I've been thinking of, but if you got to go, then I don't want to hold you back, because I know that. Listen, when you need something done, you have a busy guy do it, and Piers is a busy guy. So feel free. If you have any parting words, though,
Yeah, no, I mean, my parting words I'd say is, look, today we launched Project Ignition, which is the liquidity incentives program on Radix. It's super easy to get involved with. You just need to have Bitcoin, ETH, USDC or USDT. You stick it into Project Ignition, you'll get 20%, up to a 20% bonus in XRD upfront immediately. And you lock your liquidity for sort of 9 to 12 months in one of the 3 big dexes on Radix: DeFi Plaza, Aussie Swap, or Caviar 9. And the rule, you also get all of the dex fees and the incentive tokens from the platforms, and I think it's a pretty sweet offer. So I recommend anyone who's interested in getting Radix and is like, maybe I want to get some free Radix tokens, this is a great way of doing that.
Awesome. And that's Jspeak Podcast, and we'll see you next time, I guess. Peace.
Yeah.